The crystal glasses had just been raised when the polished son of the rival bank leaned across the long oak table and looked straight at the man standing near the kitchen door. "Stay in the garage where you belong, grease monkey. This table is for men who actually own things." The words landed like a slap. Clara Whitlock sat frozen in her cream silk dress, smile locked in place, while $200 worth of prime rib went cold on her plate. Her father had just announced her engagement to the very man who had spoken. Every rancher in the room lifted a glass except one. That one man was covered in gear oil and worn denim. He earned $18 a week keeping the tractors alive on the failing Bar H ranch. And he looked at Clara the way no one else had in 26 years. Like a person, not a deed. What happened next took 6 brutal months, for secret ledgers, and one public reckoning in front of the exact same crowd that had laughed at him. Because the man they called Grease Monkey was about to rewrite the entire balance sheet. The Bar H sat on 620 acres of stubborn West Texas ground outside Abilene. Red dirt that baked hard in summer and turned to glue in spring. For 31 years it had belonged to Everett Whitlock, a widower who ran the place with an iron ledger and an even harder heart. After his wife died, he raised 3 children the only way he knew, by making them useful. His 2 sons learned to brand and bale. Clara learned those things too, and then taught herself double-entry bookkeeping at night by lantern light. But Everett never quite knew what to do with a daughter whose mind moved faster than his own. So he mostly pretended she was only good for marrying off. That night, the dining room smelled of mesquite smoke and 20-year bourbon. Everett waited until the forks had slowed, then set his knife down like he was announcing the weather. "Harlan Whitlock Jr. has asked for Clara's hand." I told him yes. Silence for 2 heartbeats. Then the brothers hooped, glasses clinked, backs were slapped. No one looked at Clara. She lifted her water glass, touched it to her father's bourbon, and said the 2 words she had been trained to say. "Yes, sir." She was very good at smiling on command. The ranch crew ate in the equipment shed off the machine shop. Clara had been feeding them since she was 14. She knew who took extra biscuits, who nursed 1 coffee for an hour, and who never asked for anything at all. That night, she carried leftover steak through the kitchen and saw the shed door cracked open. At the far end of the table, alone, sat Elias Crow, 34 years old, single father to an 8-year-old girl named Maddie, 8 months on the payroll. He spoke little, worked harder than any 3 men combined, and kept his eyes on his own wrench. He looked up as she passed. No politenov, no false congratulations, just steady recognition, the kind that said he saw exactly what had just happened to her inside that dining room. Clara kept walking until she reached the sink. She stood there gripping cold porcelain until the water ran warm over her wrists. Then she whispered to no one, "It's done. It's a good deal." But sleep would not come. At 2:14 a.m. she pulled on a coat and walked across the frozen yard to the machine shop because the walls of her bedroom felt like another contract being signed without her consent. A single trouble light hung over the workbench. Elias Crow was recalibrating an irrigation pump that had been losing pressure for weeks. His hands moved with the calm precision of someone who had done harder things in worse places. The air smelled of diesel and cold steel. He glanced up. "Miss Whitlock." She stayed near the door. "You didn't congratulate me." He kept working the wrench. Didn't seem like something worth celebrating. The knot in her chest loosened half an inch. "It secures the ranch," she said. The words tasted like dust. "Maybe," Elias answered. "That's different from being a good life." He set the wrench down and looked at her fully for the first time. "What do you want, Clara?" The question hit harder than any proposal ever had. She realized no one had asked her that since her mother died. "I want to run this ranch properly," she said. "Not patch everyone else's mistakes in secret." Elias nodded once, as if she had just passed a test she didn't know she was taking. Then he reached under the bench, pulled out a battered metal toolbox, and opened it. Inside were 4 months of handwritten records. Fuel logs, pasture counts, supplier invoices, every discrepancy marked in neat red ink. $47,000 in stolen diesel, he said quietly. 3 trailers missing since June. And your father's foreman is the one signing the fake receipts. Clara stared at the pages. Her own secret notes had only gone back 2 months. Elias had been keeping score far longer and far better. That was the first reversal. The quiet mechanic she had barely noticed was already 3 moves ahead of everyone wearing a suit. From that night, the real work began. Clara met Elias at the machine shop every dawn for the next 3 weeks, the 2 of them moving like ghosts before the cowboys stirred. She brought black coffee in a dented thermos. He brought the next folder, each one thicker than the last. By the end of the first week, they had mapped every ghost transaction back 18 months. $112,400 in padded feed bills. $68,000 in equipment leases that never reached the ranch. The foreman, a man named Harlan Price who wore starched Wranglers and a silver belt buckle the size of a saucer, had been skimming since the day her father's stroke left the books in chaos. Elias never raised his voice. He simply laid each new page under the trouble light and let the numbers do the talking. Clara's stomach tightened every time she saw her own signature forged at the bottom of an invoice numbered 4471, then 4472, then 4473. She kept her mother's old silver pocket watch on the bench between them, the one with the cracked glass face. It had been her symbolic promise since the funeral. Fix what's broken, no matter how long it takes. Elias would glance at it now and then but never asked about it. One Thursday at 4:47 a.m., the second reversal arrived without warning. They were cross-checking a shipment of fence posts when Elias's burner phone buzzed on the workbench. He answered on speaker. A calm voice on the other end, military flat, said only, "Crow," confirming the tail on the black F-350. Plates match. Driver just met with Price at the truck stop on Route 17. Cash envelope, no camera. Elias thanked the voice and hung up. Clara's pulse hammered against her throat. You have people watching my foreman? I have people who owe me favors from a life I left behind, he said, wiping grease from his knuckles. That life doesn't come with resumes or LinkedIn profiles. It comes with phone numbers that still work at 4 a.m. He offered nothing more. Clara nodded once, the way he had nodded at her in the beginning, and they kept working. The grind settled into a rhythm of small surgical moves. Elias rebuilt the ranch's entire accounting system on a battered laptop he kept locked in the toolbox. Clara quietly transferred $178,000 from her personal brokerage account into an escrow only she and he could access. They replaced 3 of Harlan's loyal hands with quiet veterans who never asked questions. Every Tuesday at 2:14 a.m. she still walked the frozen yard, coat collar up against the wind that smelled of snow and distant pines, and every time she found Elias already there, the trouble light burning, the silver pocket watch ticking between them like a heartbeat neither of them acknowledged. Then came the new crisis. On a sleet-lashed Friday in late February, Harlan Price stormed into the main house at 11:17 a.m., Italian leather boots tracking mud across her mother's oak floors. He was wearing a new shearling coat that cost more than most hands made in a season. Behind him stood 2 members of the ranch's advisory board, polished men in Brioni suits and Patek Philippe watches that caught the chandelier light like weapons. Harlan slapped a printed email onto the dining table. The header read, "Urgent irregularities in Crow's maintenance logs." "He's been doctoring the books," Harlan announced, voice loud enough for the kitchen staff to hear. "I ran the numbers myself. This so-called mechanic you hired behind our backs has been inflating repair costs by 38%. We're looking at another $94,000 unaccounted for. I move we terminate him immediately and audit every transaction since he arrived." Clara felt the floor tilt. The advisory board members nodded like judges passing sentence. One of them, a venture capitalist named Richard Vale with a silk tie the color of fresh blood, actually smirked. "You've been distracted, Clara. Grief does that. But the ranch can't run on sentiment. This Crow character is clearly a grifter. Scrap metal expertise at best. We vote him off the property by close of business today." She gripped the edge of the table until her knuckles bleached. The silver pocket watch suddenly felt heavy in her jacket pocket, its cracked face pressing against her ribs like a reminder. She looked past the three men, through the frost-laced window, and saw Elias standing motionless in the yard. He was holding a length of chain, oil black against his fingers, watching the confrontation the way a man might watch weather roll in over mountains he had flown above many times before. Harlan leaned in, breath smelling of wintergreen and entitlement. "Say the word, Clara. I'll escort him off myself. Box of tools and all." For 3 full seconds, the only sound was the sleet snapping against the glass. Then Clara spoke, voice low but steady. "Actually, I think it's time we all saw the full ledger." She reached into her pocket, pulled out the silver watch, and set it on the table between them like a gauntlet. Its ticking filled the sudden silence, louder than it had any right to be. "Gentlemen," she said, "you're about to meet the man who kept this ranch breathing when every one of you wrote it off, and he's been keeping receipts." Outside, Elias Crow folded the chain neatly, wiped his hands on a rag, and started walking toward the house. His boots left perfect prints in the sleet. The trouble light in the machine shop still burned behind him, a single yellow eye that had seen every lie, every dollar, every forged signature. The watch kept ticking, and for the first time since she had signed that cursed contract, Clara Whitlock felt the debt beginning to turn. The real collection was only hours away. The advisory board room smelled of polished oak and cooling coffee, but the air had turned metallic, like the tang of a wrench left too long in the rain. Elias Crow pushed open the heavy door at 10:17 a.m., his canvas jacket still dusted with sleet. He didn't knock. He never needed to. Harlan's Italian loafers shifted under the table. Richard Vale's smirk faltered when he clocked the faded chevron patch on Elias's left sleeve. USAF, threadbare but unmistakable. The third man, a banker named Philip Cross with a Mont Blanc clipped to his pocket, cleared his throat as if the sound could reset the room. Clara stayed seated, the silver pocket watch still ticking between them like a heartbeat that refused to quit. Elias stopped 3 feet from the table. He didn't speak right away. Instead, he reached into his jacket and produced a single sheet of paper, crisp, folded once. Invoice number 4471, dated 7 years earlier. The ink had faded in places, but the numbers were iron. "Morning," he said, voice low, almost conversational. "Heard my name mentioned." Harlan recovered first, the wintergreen scent sharpening as he leaned forward. "This is a private meeting, Crow. You were told to clear your things. The ranch is divesting non-essential assets." Elias unfolded the invoice without hurry. The paper crackled. "Non-essential. Funny word. This document says the ranch owed Pacific Salvage $178,000 for emergency parts and labor after the 17 flood took out the North Pump Station. You gentlemen signed it off as unrecoverable. I didn't." He laid the page beside the watch. The ticking seemed to sync with the second hand on Richard Vale's Patek Philippe. Clara's eyes flicked to Elias. She had only learned the first layer 2 nights ago, when he'd slid a dog-eared flight log across her kitchen table at 2:14 a.m. call sign Reaper. 287 combat missions over 2 tours. Then the quiet exit after a classified incident in Helmand that never made the papers. He'd come home to raise his daughter alone, traded night vision goggles for grease-stained coveralls, and never once mentioned any of it until the ranch started bleeding out. Now the second layer was leaking, slow and deliberate, the way fuel seeps from a cracked line. Philip Cross adjusted his glasses. Even if that's legitimate, it's ancient history. The current operating agreement was drawn up by the same firm that buried this debt. Elias cut in. He produced a second document, thicker, clipped with a rusted staple. Page 17. My signature's at the bottom. Silent partner since 18. The year your firm, Mr. Cross, advised Clara's late husband to sell the mineral rights for pennies. The room temperature dropped another 5 degrees. Harlan's face flushed the color of his overpriced tie. Outside, the sleet had turned to a steady, icy rain that drummed on the metal roof like distant rotor blades. Elias's daughter, 9-year-old Maddie, waited in the machine shop with the trouble light. She clutched the same silver pocket watch's twin chain, her grandfather's, the one Elias had carried through every deployment. She'd been polishing it with a soft cloth the way he taught her when the shouting started. Back inside, Clara stood. Her voice carried the weight of every sleepless night since the funeral. The full audit arrived by courier at dawn. Every forged maintenance log, every inflated vendor contract, every dollar siphoned into offshore accounts with your names attached. Elias didn't come here looking for work. He came because I asked him to look at the books when no one else would. Richard Vale's silk tie suddenly looked too tight. He reached for his phone, then thought better of it. This is unexpected. We should discuss this like professionals. Perhaps over lunch at the club. No club, Elias said. The words landed flat. We discuss it here, now. Or we discuss it in front of Judge Harlan's own ethics board at 9 a.m. tomorrow. Your choice. A new tension rippled through the room. Philip Cross's Mont Blanc rolled across the table and clattered to the floor. No one moved to pick it up. Harlan tried one last time, voice dropping to the smooth baritone that closed million-dollar deals. Clara, be reasonable. This man is clearly leveraging old favors. Grief has clouded your judgment. Again. The word again hung there like a blade. Elias's jaw flexed once. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out the folded letter that had lived next to the watch for 7 years. Yellowed at the edges now, creased from 1,000 silent readings. Maddie had found it in his duffel the week after her mother's car accident. A letter from Clara's husband, written the night before he died, begging Elias to watch over the ranch, and over her, if the worst ever happened. He didn't read it aloud. He simply laid it beside the watch and the invoice. The paper napkin it had been wrapped around for safekeeping still bore the faint grease stain from the last engine he and Clara's husband had rebuilt together in that same machine shop. Clara's breath caught at the sight of her husband's handwriting. She hadn't known the letter existed. The mini-crisis arrived 23 minutes later, sharp and unexpected. A heavy knock rattled the front door. 2 county deputies stood on the porch, rain dripping from their hats. The taller one held a writ of eviction, signed at 8:45 that morning by a judge who played golf with Richard Vale every Thursday. The board had moved faster than anyone anticipated. The ranch's accounts were to be frozen at noon. Equipment trucks were already rolling up the long drive, headlights cutting through the downpour like accusatory eyes. Harlan allowed himself the ghost of a smile. Seems the law moves quicker than nostalgia, gentlemen. Elias looked at the deputies, then at the silver watch still ticking on the oak table. Its cracked crystal caught the overhead light and threw it back in fractured pieces. He folded the old letter once more, slipped it inside his jacket, and met Clara's gaze. Call the hangar, he said quietly. Tell them Reaper's coming home. The deputies exchanged a glance. One of them had served in the same theater. The name clearly meant something. Clara's fingers brushed the watch as she stood taller. The debt was no longer turning. It was accelerating. But the real books, the encrypted drive hidden beneath the floorboards of the machine shop, the one containing every wire transfer, every deleted email, every time-stamped betrayal, still had to surface. And the board had just forced their hand 24 hours early. Elias turned toward the door, boots leaving wet prints on the Persian rug. The trouble light in the distance flickered once, as if acknowledging the shift. Maddie watched from the window, the twin chain of the pocket watch wrapped tight around her small wrist like armor. The rain fell harder. The trucks kept coming. And somewhere in the ledgers yet to be opened, a name no one in that room had uttered aloud waited its turn. The rain hammered the tin roof of the equipment shed like rifle shots. Elias stood in the doorway, collar turned up against the wind, watching the first two flatbeds crawl up the gravel drive. Their tires spat mud onto the fence posts he'd mended himself 15 years earlier. Richard Vale's lawyers had thought of everything, or so they believed. At 11:47 a.m., the power flickered once, then died. The ranch went dark except for the emergency generator coughing to life behind the barn. Elias stepped out of the main house carrying a battered metal toolbox that looked older than most of the deputies. He set it on the hood of the lead truck with a deliberate clank. "Gentlemen," he said, voice low and even, "before you load a single wrench, you might want to check the serial numbers on those pumps." The lead deputy, a thick-shouldered man named Ruiz whose father had once flown Jolly Green Giants out of Da Nang, hesitated. "We have a court order, Mr. Crow." Elias walked forward until the rain ran off the brim of his old ball cap in a steady curtain. He pulled the folded letter from his jacket, the same one that had arrived in yesterday's mail, its edges soft from years of being opened and closed. The paper smelled faintly of engine oil and gunpowder even now. He unfolded it under the truck's headlights. The ink had bled in places, but the signature at the bottom remained unmistakable. Elias J. Crow, P. Chief Design Engineer, Vale Irrigation Systems, 2009. Ruiz read the letter once, then again. His flashlight beam trembled slightly. Elias spoke without raising his voice. "Those patents you're about to seize? They were never transferred. The board voted to restructure the intellectual property the same week they voted to bury me. Only problem is, you can't bury a man who never signed the quitclaim." Inside the house, Clara stood at the kitchen island with Maddie. The little girl still wore the silver watch like a bracelet, its face now fogged from the warmth of her skin. She traced the crack in the crystal with one small finger, the same way her father once did when he came home from 3-month tours and needed something real to hold. "Papa's going to fix it," Maddie whispered. Clara didn't answer. She was listening to the scanner on the counter crackle to life. "Dispatch, this is Unit 4. We've got a situation at the Bar H Ranch. Subject is claiming patent ownership on all on-site irrigation infrastructure. Requests we contact the USPTO database before proceeding. Also, he just used the callsign Reaper on an open channel. Over." The radio fell quiet for 3 full seconds. Then a new voice cut in, older, calm, the kind of voice that had once directed close air support over Fallujah. "Unit 4, stand by. This is Colonel Marcus Reed, retired United States Air Force. I'll be there in 12 minutes. Tell Mr. Crow the old wingman still owes him a beer from Mosul, 2007. Elias allowed himself one slow breath. The name had finally slipped out. Not the whole truth. Not yet. Just enough to make the truck stop moving. Richard Vale arrived at 1:12 p.m. in a black Range Rover, still wearing last night's Brioni suit, the left cuff now stained with coffee. His Patek Philippe caught the weak sunlight as he slammed the door. Mud immediately ruined the mirror shine of his Italian shoes. "What the hell is this circus?" he demanded, striding toward the assembled group. His eyes found Elias and narrowed. "You, still playing dress-up in your dead brother's coveralls." Elias said nothing. He simply handed Richard the letter. Richard scanned it. His face went the color of old parchment. For the first time since the boardroom coup 18 months earlier, doubt flickered behind the expensive haircut. "You forged this." "Check the watermark," Elias replied. "And the notary stamp from Judge Lang in 2009. Same judge who signed your eviction this morning." Small world. A second mini-crisis arrived without warning at 1:38 p.m. One of the younger deputies had grown impatient. He tried to crank the winch on the lead truck to begin loading the center pivot irrigators anyway. The cable snapped on the first pull, whipping backward with a vicious crack. It sliced through the air 2 feet from Maddie's head where she had slipped outside to stand beside her father. The world froze. Elias moved faster than any man wearing barn boots should. He caught the girl, spun her behind him, and felt the cable lash across his own shoulder instead. The pain was bright and immediate, like a hot branding iron. Blood darkened the flannel in seconds. Maddie clutched the silver watch against her chest, eyes wide. Elias's voice dropped to something the deputies would remember for years. "Touch another piece of my equipment, son, and the next cable that snaps won't be steel." Richard took one involuntary step backward. The polished arrogance cracked another fraction. Colonel Reed's old blue Ford pulled in at that moment, tires crunching on the wet gravel. The retired pilot climbed out slowly, flight jacket still bearing faded Reaper Squadron patches. He took in the blood on Elias's shoulder, the letter in Richard's shaking hand. The little girl holding the cracked pocket watch like it was the only thing keeping her father on the ground. Reed looked straight at Richard Vale. "Mr. Vale," he said, "you just tried to evict the man who personally designed the redundant fail-safes that kept this entire valley from drying up during the 11 drought. The man whose name is still etched on every patent filed between 2007 and 2014. The man who flew 47 combat missions under the callsign Reaper so the rest of us could come home." Reed paused, letting the rain fill the silence. "And you did it with a signature you didn't bother to verify." Elias pressed a clean rag to his bleeding shoulder. The pain was useful, kept him focused, because the encrypted drive still waited beneath the machine shop floorboards. The one with the original transfer ledgers. The one that would show Richard Vale had personally authorized the deletion of Elias's name from every corporate document the day after his Black Hawk went down over Helmand Province. The debt had just grown another 0. Clara appeared at Elias's side with a proper field dressing. She wrapped his shoulder without a word, her fingers brushing the same silver watch now back in his pocket. The cracked crystal pressed against his ribs like a second heartbeat. Maddie tugged at his good hand. "Papa!" The truck stopped. They had. All 6 of them sat idling in the rain while deputies checked laptops and made quiet phone calls. Richard stood alone now, phone to his ear, speaking in rapid, hushed sentences that carried on the wind. "I don't care what it costs. Freeze the injunction. I want our people in that machine shop before." He stopped, because Elias had stepped close enough for Richard to see the faded scar that ran from temple to jawline, the one no amount of corporate grooming could hide. "You kept the watch," Richard whispered, almost to himself. Elias reached into his jacket and produced the letter once more. This time he let Richard see the second page, the one that had been folded behind the first for years. A single line in familiar handwriting. "If anything happens to me, give this to Reaper. He'll know what it means." The rain kept falling. The generators kept humming. And somewhere under the floorboards of the machine shop, the next layer of the original engineer's name waited its turn to surface. The debt was nowhere near finished. The rain eased to a drizzle by the time the convoy reached the old corporate campus on Industrial Parkway. 47 minutes past midnight. The auction room inside Building 7 still smelled of fresh varnish and expensive cologne. 214 shareholders, engineers, and former colleagues filled the tiered seats. They had come expecting a simple liquidation of obsolete patents. They had no idea they were about to witness an execution. Richard Vale stood at the podium in a Brioni suit the color of midnight, Patek gleaming under the lights, Italian shoes planted like he still owned the marble beneath them. His voice cracked only once when he announced the opening bid on the core engine patents. 2.8 million. Elias sat in the back row wearing the same oil-stained jacket, silver watch now polished on his wrist. Clara held his hand. Maddie slept against his good shoulder, the folded letter tucked inside her stuffed rabbit like a promise kept. The first reversal came at lot 17. The auctioneer read the provenance aloud. Original schematics for the adaptive turbine system, filed 2009. previously credited to Richard Vale. A ripple moved through the room. Elias stood. His boots left faint mud prints on the polished floor. He walked to the front without hurry. Every eye tracked him. Richard's face drained of color the moment he recognized the scar. "Counter-proposal," Elias said, voice low but carrying to the last row. He slid a single flash drive across the podium. "These are the original transfer ledgers, signed by Mr. Vale himself on October 14, 2011, the day after Reaper's Black Hawk was reported lost over Helmand. They show he erased my name from 43 patents, then billed the company $8 million to recreate work I had already finished." The room went dead quiet except for the soft click of laptops opening, screens lighting up with the documents now streaming live to every shareholder device. Gasps rolled like thunder. Richard's hand trembled on the podium edge. The Italian shoes suddenly looked too clean for the mess spreading beneath them. Elias kept his eyes on the man who had once called him scrap metal. Seat 18C on the flight home from Kabul was empty because I gave it to a kid who wanted to see his father. I still have the boarding pass. I still have the dog tags of the 3 men who didn't make it back because someone here decided their pensions were better spent on bonuses. He turned to the crowd. "My name is Elias Crow. I am the original engineer. These patents were never his to sell. The gavel never fell. Instead, the board's general counsel stepped forward, pale, and announced an immediate forensic audit. Richard's Patek caught the light as his arm dropped to his side like dead weight. Later, in the green room behind the stage, Richard stood alone under fluorescent lights that buzzed like incoming rotors. Elias waited in the doorway, Maddie's rabbit still in his good hand. "I thought you were dead," Richard whispered. His voice had lost every polished edge. "When the casualty report came in, I told myself it didn't matter anymore, that the company needed to move forward. I was wrong. I stole your life twice, once in Helmand, once in that boardroom." He looked up, eyes wet.
"I'm sorry, Reaper."
"I'm so damn sorry." Elias studied him for a long second. Then he nodded once. The debt had finally been paid in full. The next morning, the company issued a public statement. Richard Vale appeared on the same stage at 9:17 a.m. No Brioni this time, just a plain gray shirt and the tremor in his hands. He read the apology without notes. Every former colleague who had laughed at the janitor-turned-mechanic now sat in stunned silence. When he finished, he looked straight into the camera. "I owe everything I built to a man I tried to bury. Elias Crow kept us all flying. I was the one who clipped his wings. Today I return every patent, every royalty, every stolen cent. With interest. The stock opened up 4% anyway. Reputation, it turned out, still mattered." 3 weeks later, the machine shop on the edge of town smelled of fresh coffee and solder. Elias sat at the workbench, cracked silver watch now repaired, its second hand ticking steadily beside Maddie's rabbit. The letter lay unfolded between them. The second page finally read aloud to a little girl who would grow up knowing exactly who her father had been. Clara leaned in the doorway, arms crossed, smiling softly at the quiet family scene. Outside, the same 6 trucks that once blocked the gate now delivered new tooling paid for by the settlement check numbered 4471. Richard's final gesture had arrived by courier the day before. A single black frame containing the faded boarding pass from seat 18C and a handwritten note that simply read, "Thank you for the empty seat." Elias ran his thumb over the cracked crystal one last time, then placed the watch on the shelf above the workbench where it could catch the morning light. The debt was gone. What remained was simpler. A father, a daughter, a second chance measured in small, steady heartbeats instead of rotor blades.